He changed one cell in my sheet and called it cleaner. A week later, $12 million vanished into the ether like smoke through a cracked window. They fired me for being too precise, said my models were unnecessarily complex. Now those same executives pay me $5,000 an hour to untangle the mess they created. Every hour I bill feels like justice served cold, and I have 40 hours worth of invoices to send. My name is Madeline Brooks, and for 12 years, I was the living embodiment of internal controls at Vetricor Communications. Not the flashy kind of employee who gets featured in company newsletters or invited to golf outings with the C-suite. I was the one they called at 11:30 p.m. when quarterly reports didn't balance. The one who could trace a penny through 17 subsidiaries across 3 continents. My cubicle on the 14th floor had become a shrine to precision color-coded binders arranged by fiscal year. Dual monitors displaying spreadsheets that sprawled like digital cities. And a coffee mug that read, "I found your missing million." A gift from the audit team after I caught a revenue recognition error that would have triggered an SEC investigation. The morning Troy Whitaker arrived changed everything. Fresh from Wharton, sporting a Patek Philippe that cost more than my annual bonus. He swept into our department like he owned it, which, technically, he did. Senior Vice President of Financial Planning and Analysis at 32. His LinkedIn profile glowed with buzzwords: transformational leader, change agent, digital native. What it didn't mention was his complete inability to distinguish between streamlining and strip mining. Our first real clash came during the Q3 planning meeting. I was presenting my revenue projection model, a beast of a workbook I'd refined over a decade, with built-in checks that had caught countless errors before they metastasized into disasters. Troy interrupted me mid-sentence, his manicured finger jabbing at the projection screen. "This is exactly what's wrong with legacy thinking," he announced, addressing the room as if I weren't standing there. "Look at this spreadsheet. It's like a kindergarten craft project. Formulas nested 6 deep, references bouncing between 23 tabs. Where's the elegance? Where's the simplicity?" The conference room fell silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. My colleagues, people who'd relied on my models for years, shifted in their seats, some nodding along to appear progressive, others studying their phones with sudden intensity. "The complexity serves a purpose," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the heat rising in my chest. "Each validation layer catches different types of errors. The cross-references ensure consistency across business units. This isn't complexity for its own sake, it's protection." Troy's laugh was sharp, performative. "Protection, from what, our own intelligence? This is exactly the kind of overthinking that slows us down. We need agile financial systems, not Fort Knox." Margaret from Treasury covered her mouth, hiding either a cough or a laugh. David from Audit wouldn't meet my eyes. These were people who'd called me on weekends, begging for help when their numbers wouldn't reconcile. Now they watched Troy perform his MBA theater, and I could see them recalculating their allegiances in real time. "When you remove those protections," I continued, "you create vulnerabilities. Each formula serves as a checkpoint. Each validation prevents downstream errors that compound. Compound into job security for people who make themselves indispensable through deliberate complexity." Troy cut in. His smile was magazine perfect, all teeth and no warmth. "I've seen this playbook before. Create a system only you can understand, then act like the company can't survive without you." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. After 12 years of 70-hour weeks, of catching errors that would have cratered earnings calls, of building systems that had saved Vetricor millions, I was being framed as some kind of corporate parasite. I wanted to list every crisis I'd prevented, every audit I'd shepherded to clean closure, every late night I'd spent ensuring our numbers were bulletproof. Instead, I simply said, "The documentation for every formula is available on the shared drive. The logic is transparent to anyone who takes the time to understand it." "Time?" Troy repeated, as if the word tasted sour. "That's exactly what we don't have. The market moves at light speed. We need financial systems that match that pace, not monuments to paranoia." He turned to address the room, his back to me in a gesture so dismissive it felt rehearsed. "Starting Monday, we're going to modernize our approach, flatten these Baroque spreadsheets, trust our people instead of burying them in redundant checks. Make our finances as clean and fast as our fiber optic networks. The meeting ended with polite applause, the hollow sound of professionals protecting their mortgages. As I gathered my laptop and papers, I caught Troy's reflection in the conference room glass. He was already on his phone, probably updating his LinkedIn about driving transformation and challenging institutional inertia. I returned to my cubicle and opened the revenue model he'd mocked. Each formula was a scar from a past mistake, a lesson learned through pain. The nested IF statements he'd ridiculed had caught a $12 million classification error 2 years ago. The redundant checks had prevented us from recognizing revenue before installation was complete, a violation that had sunk our competitor Telaxis. But I was just a 42-year-old analyst with an state school MBA and a wardrobe from Target. What did I know about elegance? The dismantling began on a Tuesday. Troy scheduled a working session at 8 a.m. sharp, which in corporate speak meant public execution with coffee and bagels. He'd assembled what he called his transformation team, 3 fresh MBA graduates who looked at Excel the way tourists look at subway maps, with a mixture of confidence and confusion. "Madeline, glad you could join us," Troy said, as if I'd had a choice. The conference room whiteboard already bore his handiwork, my carefully architected model, reduced to buzzword soup. Simplify, flatten, trust the process. He pulled up my revenue recognition model on the main screen. 10 years of refinement, thousands of hours of work, displayed like a patient on an operating table. "Let's start with the obvious redundancies," he announced, highlighting an entire section of formulas. "This whole validation sequence? Gone. If our sales teams are entering correct data, we don't need 17 checks to verify it. Those checks caught $3.7 million in premature revenue recognition last quarter alone," I said, pulling up the error log I'd maintained religiously. "Sales teams work on commission. They have every incentive to do their jobs," Troy interrupted. "This culture of mistrust is exactly what's holding us back. Madison here," he gestured to one of his MBA disciples, a blonde woman who couldn't have been older than 25, ran the numbers. Maintaining these Byzantine checks costs us 43 hours of processing time per quarter. Madison nodded eagerly. Her consultant-perfect blazer still creased from the store. "The opportunity cost is significant. Those 43 hours could be redirected to value-add activities." Value-add. The phrase made my teeth ache. I watched Troy delete 3 years of accumulated safeguards with the casual brutality of someone burning photographs of strangers. "Now this," he moved to the currency conversion matrix, "is particularly egregious. 64 separate exchange rate validations. We have automated feeds from Reuters. One source of truth, not 64. Different regions report at different times," I explained, hearing the futility in my own voice. "The validations ensure we're not mixing Tuesday's European rates with Thursday's Asian rates. The timing differences alone will average out over the quarter," Troy said, collapsing the entire matrix into a single cell. "You're solving problems that don't exist, Madeline, creating complexity to justify your existence." The transformation team typed furiously on their laptops, documenting each simplification like archaeologists cataloging ruins. I recognized the performance, the theatrical productivity of people who mistake destruction for progress. By noon, my model was unrecognizable. Entire tabs had been deleted, renamed, or consolidated into summary sheets that obscured crucial details. The audit trail I'd built, the breadcrumbs that could trace any number back to its source, vanished into Troy's vision of elegance. "One more thing," Troy said, and I knew what was coming before he spoke. "The macro buttons, all this automation you've built, it's a black box. Nobody understands it but you. There's a 50-page documentation file, which nobody will ever read. Delete them. If we need calculations, we'll do them transparently, where everyone can see." I watched him strip out 5 years of VBA code with 3 clicks, subroutines that had prevented countless errors, automated reconciliations that ran while we slept, all reduced to digital ash. "Much cleaner," Madison murmured appreciatively. The afternoon brought the final insult. An invitation appeared on my calendar. "Transition planning, Madeline Brooks, the HR representative, A nervous man named Gerald, who'd once asked me to help with his daughter's algebra homework, couldn't meet my eyes. "This isn't a reflection on your performance." He read from a script that probably came from the same consultants who taught Troy to weaponize simplicity. "We're moving in a new direction that requires different skill sets." "Different skill sets," I repeated. "You mean younger and cheaper?" Gerald winced but continued reading. "We'd like you to spend your remaining 2 weeks training your replacement. Logan Williams will be joining us from Troy's previous company. We believe your institutional knowledge will be invaluable in ensuring a smooth transition." Institutional knowledge. Corporate speak for everything we're about to destroy but need someone to blame when it goes wrong. I spent that evening at my desk, not working but documenting. Every formula Troy had deleted, every validation he'd removed, every safeguard he'd dismissed as paranoia. I recorded them all, not in the company system, where Troy's team could delete them, but in my personal cloud storage. Screenshots, formula strings, process flows, all tagged with dates and descriptions. My colleagues avoided me like I had something contagious. Only Raj from IT stopped by, ostensibly to check my computer but really to whisper, "I'm backing up everything to an external drive, just in case." Just in case, we both knew what was coming. Troy's simplified model was a house of cards in a hurricane zone, and hurricane season was always just 1/4 away. On my last Thursday, I met Logan Williams, 26, eager, and equipped with the dangerous combination of an expensive education and no experience. He looked at my documentation like it was written in Sanskrit. "Don't worry about understanding all the details," he assured me. "Troy says we're moving to a more intuitive approach. Trust the data, not the formulas." I thought about explaining that data without formulas was like a car without brakes. It would run beautifully until the first curve. Instead, I smiled and showed him how to update the revenue forecast. Skipping the warnings about currency timing and recognition criteria, he wouldn't have listened anyway. My final act was an email to the audit committee, copying my personal address. Transition documentation. Revenue recognition model changes. Attached were 47 files showing the before and after states of every critical control Troy had eliminated. Professional, factual, and damning if anyone ever bothered to read them. As I packed my desk, sliding 13 years of excellence into a banker's box, Troy stopped by. His smile was the victory lap of someone who'd won a race nobody else was running. "No hard feelings, Madeline. Sometimes organizations need fresh perspectives. I'm sure you'll land on your feet." I looked at him, really looked at him. Beneath the Wharton polish and consulting speak was someone who genuinely believed complexity was the enemy rather than the consequence of learning from mistakes. He'd know better soon enough. "Good luck with Q4 closing," I said. "It should be very educational." My 2 weeks training Logan felt like teaching someone to perform surgery with oven mitts on. He approached Excel with the breezy confidence of someone who'd aced theoretical case studies but never faced real data that fought back. Every morning at 9 a.m. sharp, he'd arrive with his venti macchiato and wireless earbuds, ready to revolutionize financial reporting. "So this whole section here," Logan pointed at the European subsidiary consolidation, "seems super redundant. Why can't we just pull the numbers straight from their system?" I'd answered this question 3 times already, but repetition was apparently part of my penance. Because they report in local GAAP. These formulas convert to US GAAP. If you skip this step, you'll be mixing accounting standards. Right, he said, already clicking past the warnings I'd built into the cells. Troy mentioned something about over-engineering. We should trust the source systems more. Trust, that word again, weaponized into willful blindness. I watched him flatten another pivot table, reducing 20 dimensions of analysis to 3. He worked with the cheerful efficiency of someone dismantling a bomb without knowing what wires did what. I started my documentation project that first Monday. Not the official knowledge transfer Troy had requested. That was happening in our daily sessions where Logan nodded through my explanations while texting under the table. This was different. This was evidence. Each evening, after Logan left for whatever networking happy hour Troy's team frequented, I'd stay behind and catalog the carnage. Screenshots became my new language. Logan Day 1, flattened subsidiary tabs. Logan Day 2, deleted FX validation. Logan Day 4, hard-coded Q3 accruals. The file names told a story of systematic destruction, each one time-stamped and annotated with the specific controls being eliminated. I documented not just what was changed, but why it mattered, the errors each validation had caught, the misstatements each formula had prevented. You sure spend a lot of time on documentation. Logan observed on Wednesday of my final week, finding me still at my desk at 7 p.m. Troy says the best documentation is clean, simple code that explains itself. Code that explains itself is like a car that drives itself, I replied, saving another screenshot. Great in theory until you hit unexpected conditions. He laughed, missing the warning entirely. You're funny, Madeline. Too bad you're so resistant to change. Troy thinks you could have been great if you'd been more adaptable. Adaptable, another buzzword for willing to ignore hard-won experience. I smiled and continued documenting his deletion of the revenue waterfall that had taken me 3 years to perfect. By Thursday, Logan had discovered the macro buttons Troy wanted eliminated. He stared at the VBA code like it was hieroglyphics, which to him, it might as well have been. This is exactly what Troy meant, he said, shaking his head. Thousands of lines of code that nobody understands. Total black box. There's a line-by-line annotation. We won't need it. Madison found this add-in that does everything with AI. Point, click, done. No coding required. I thought about explaining that AI without understanding was like flying blind in a storm. Eventually, you'd hit something solid. Instead, I watched him delete 5 years of automation with the casual cruelty of someone erasing a phone number they'd never need. The most painful moment came when he reached the deferred revenue schedule. This wasn't just formulas and validations. This was the beating heart of our recognition timing, the thing that kept us SEC compliant and out of the Wall Street Journal's scandal pages. God, this is complex, Logan muttered, scrolling through the interconnected schedules. 27 linked worksheets, just to track when we can recognize revenue. We're a telecom company, not NASA. Different services have different recognition triggers. I explained for what felt like the 100th time. Installation, activation, service commencement, they all have specific criteria. Mix them up and the auditors will catch it, Logan finished. That's what they're paid for, right? We don't need to do their job for them. I made a note. Logan Day 8. Consolidated revenue recognition to single schedule. The screenshot showed him dragging 27 worksheets into one, creating a Frankenstein monster of mixed timing conventions that would explode the moment someone tried to reconcile it. My last day was a Friday. Logan threw a small goodbye party. Him, Madison, and 2 other members of Troy's transformation team. They'd bought a grocery store sheet cake with "Good luck" written in green frosting. We stood around my emptying cubicle, eating sugar and pretending this was a celebration rather than a funeral for institutional knowledge. We should do lunch sometime, Logan offered, already looking past me to the weekend. Once I get settled in, I'd love to pick your brain about the historical stuff. Historical stuff. 13 years reduced to ancient history in 2 weeks. I spent my final hours creating what I called the "When Things Go Wrong" folder. Not if, when. Inside were 32 documents, each titled with a likely crisis: when European revenue doesn't tie out, when deferred calculations break, when currency triangulation fails. Each document contained the original formulas, the validations Troy had deleted, and step-by-step instructions for fixing the inevitable errors. I uploaded everything to my personal cloud storage, then sent one final email to my personal address with the subject line, "VetraCore Financial Model Documentation, Complete Archive." Attached were 347 files comprising every formula, every macro, every validation that had kept VetraCore's financial reporting accurate for over a decade. As I carried my banker's box through the lobby, security wished me well. The guard, Thomas, who'd seen me arrive at 6 a.m. and leave at 10 p.m. more times than either of us could count, shook his head. "They're making a mistake," he said quietly. "You're the one who keeps the lights on." "Not anymore," I replied. "Now I get to watch them figure out how dark it can get." The parking garage elevator carried me down to P3 one last time. I loaded my box into the trunk of my sensible Honda, another thing Troy's team probably mocked, and sat in the driver's seat for a moment, Through the windshield, I could see the Vetricor Tower stretching into the afternoon sky, all glass and steel and misplaced confidence. Somewhere on the 14th floor, Logan was probably already implementing more improvements, stripping away more safeguards, trusting more processes that had never earned that trust. The first cracks wouldn't show for weeks, maybe months, but they would show. I started the engine and drove toward whatever came next, my phone already pinging with LinkedIn notifications. The market for financial analysts who actually understood their numbers was about to get more interesting. The first month after Vitricor felt like detox. I'd wake at 5:45 a.m. out of habit, reach for my phone to check overnight error reports, then remember there were no reports to check, no fires to fight, no Logan texting at midnight with quick questions that revealed fundamental misunderstandings of basic accounting principles. I spent those early weeks the way some people spend recovery methodically rebuilding. First came the business cards. Brooks Financial Integrity seemed like the right name, a little pointed perhaps, but accuracy in naming felt appropriate for someone in my line of work. The tagline came to me during a 3 a.m. insomnia session. Built to last, paid to correct. My home office transformed from a place where I'd spent weekends fixing Vitricor's problems to command central for my new venture. 2 monitors became 4. The dining room table disappeared under process flowcharts and revenue recognition frameworks. I built templates for the kinds of errors I'd spent 13 years preventing. Not generic consulting frameworks, but battle-tested solutions for real problems. The first client came through LinkedIn. Sandra Martinez, CFO of a medical device startup, had seen my carefully worded post about ensuring financial integrity in growth stage companies. We met at a Starbucks halfway between our offices, and within 10 minutes, she was showing me spreadsheets that made my eye twitch. Our previous analyst said he'd modernized everything, she explained, scrolling through formulas that referenced cells that no longer existed. Simplified our reporting. Now nothing ties out. I recognized Troy's philosophy in the wreckage, the same aggressive simplification, the same trust in systems that hadn't earned it. 3 days later, I'd rebuilt their revenue waterfall and found $800,000 in recognition errors. Sandra paid my invoice within 24 hours and referred me to 2 other CFOs before the week ended. Word traveled through the financial community like wildfire through dry brush. Brooks will find what's broken. She's expensive but worth it. Saved us from restating 3 quarters. My calendar filled with companies suffering from what I privately called MBA syndrome, the condition that resulted when theoretical knowledge met practical complexity and decided theory should win. I structured my practice carefully. No full-time commitments, no long-term contracts. I came in, diagnosed the problems, fixed what was broken, and left behind systems that would work until the next bright young thing decided to improve them. My rates climbed from reasonable to substantial to what one client called reassuringly expensive. The work itself was satisfying in a way Vitricor had never been. Every client represented a puzzle, and unlike my old job, I had complete control over the solutions. No Troy to simplify away safeguards, no Logan to delete what he didn't understand. Just me, the numbers, and the truth, hiding beneath layers of misguided improvements. I developed a reputation for a particular kind of cold efficiency, the Ice Queen of internal controls. One blog post called me, and I didn't dispute it. When you're rebuilding financial systems, warmth is less valuable than precision. My clients didn't hire me to make friends. They hired me to make sure their numbers wouldn't destroy them. 3 months into my new life, patterns emerged. The calls usually came after quarter end. Panic barely concealed beneath professional courtesy. We've discovered some discrepancies. Our auditors have raised concerns. The board is asking questions we can't answer. I'd listen, quote my rate, now at $3,000 per hour, and wait for the inevitable pause before they agreed. My favorite client was a telecommunications startup whose 28-year-old CFO had tried to build their entire financial infrastructure in Google Sheets. Excel is bloated legacy software, he told his board. The board called me after their Series B funding nearly fell through when investors couldn't make sense of their financials. It took me 6 days to build them a real system. The CFO learned Excel. The funding closed. I kept meticulous records of every engagement, not just the technical details, though those filled dozens of notebooks, but the patterns. How long between simplification and crisis? Which errors appeared first? How much money companies lost before admitting they needed help? The data painted a picture of an entire industry learning the same lessons over and over, paying tuition in misstatements and market confidence. My LinkedIn profile became a strange sort of performance art. Former clients would write recommendations that read like disaster movies where I played the unlikely hero. Madeline saved us from a complete restatement. Found 7-figure errors our auditors missed. Worth every penny of her admittedly steep fees. Troy's team at Vetricor must have seen them. They never reacted, but I knew they were watching. 6 months out, I was turning down more work than I accepted. Not from arrogance, but from strategy. Scarcity created value. Being too available would dilute the mystique that let me charge rates that made even Fortune 500 CFOs pause. I chose clients carefully, favoring complexity over size, interesting problems over easy money. The freedom was intoxicating. No meetings about meetings, no performance reviews where Troy's disciples would rate my adaptability and culture fit. Just the clean, honest work of making numbers tell the truth. I woke when I wanted, worked when I chose, and charged what the market would bear, which, it turned out, was quite a lot. My old Vetricor colleagues reached out occasionally. Raj from IT asked for advice on freelancing. Margaret from Treasury wanted to know if I was hiring. David from Audit sent cryptic messages about interesting developments in the quarterly close process. I responded politely but maintained distance. That chapter was closed, even if its epilogue was still being written. The money was better than I'd ever imagined. 6 months of consulting earned more than 2 years at Vetricor. But the real satisfaction came from the knowledge that somewhere in that glass tower, my carefully constructed safeguards were gone, and reality was about to submit its invoice. I marked my calendar July 15th, Q2, earnings report. If my experience meant anything, that's when the first cracks would show. Troy's simplified systems would face their first real test. Year-end accruals reversing, seasonal fluctuations hitting, currency movements creating chaos in his elegant single source of truth model. Until then, I had work to do. Real work. The kind that kept companies solvent and CFOs sleeping at night. The kind Troy would never understand until it was too late. My phone buzzed with another LinkedIn message. A controller at a software company, struggling with revenue recognition after their latest modernization initiative. I checked my calendar, quoted my rate, and smiled when they agreed without negotiation. Built to last, paid to correct, business was good in the ruins of other people's simplifications. The first whisper came through Raj at 11:15 p.m. on a Wednesday. His text was carefully neutral. Interesting times in the 14th floor. Thought you should know. No details. But Raj didn't send late-night messages without reason. I filed it away and returned to the biotech client whose revenue recognition had been streamlined into nonsense. 2 days later, Margaret's LinkedIn message was more direct. Q2 close is a disaster. Troy's blaming the Europe team. I could picture it perfectly. The confusion when consolidated numbers didn't match regional reports. The finger-pointing that always followed systemic failures. Margaret had survived 15 years at Vetricor by knowing when to document everything. If she was reaching out, the situation was worse than just missed deadlines. The real intelligence came from David in Audit, who called from his personal phone at 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday. Can't talk long, he started, which meant he was probably in the office, working through whatever mess had prompted weekend overtime. External auditors are asking about revenue recognition timing, specifically, the deferred calculations. I kept my voice neutral. The ones Logan consolidated into a single schedule. That's the thing. Nobody can find the original logic. Logan says he simplified it based on Troy's instructions. But the numbers coming out make no sense. We've got revenue hitting the P&L before services are even installed. The exact scenario my 27 linked worksheets had prevented. Each service type had different recognition triggers, different timing conventions, different regulatory requirements. Mashing them together was like trying to run 3 different races on the same track at the same time. There should be documentation, I said carefully. I left extensive notes about the recognition criteria. David's laugh was bitter. Troy had Logan delete most of it. Said it was outdated overthinking. Now they're trying to reverse engineer the logic from the reports, but he trailed off. But they couldn't, because understanding those reports required understanding why they were built that way, and that knowledge had walked out the door with me. The drumbeat of messages accelerated over the next week. A controller I'd never met messaged about urgent consulting needs. A senior analyst asked if I had any historical documentation about Vetricor's systems. Even vendors started reaching out. The Reuters team that managed our FX feeds wondered if I knew why Vetricor was disputing charges for services they'd specifically requested. I maintained professional distance, responding to direct questions, but volunteering nothing. My consulting practice was too busy for nostalgic involvement in past employers' self-inflicted wounds, but I kept screenshots of every message, building a timeline of what sounded like cascading system failures. The smoking gun came from an unexpected source. LinkedIn showed me as having viewed the profile of Jennifer Walsh, Vetricor's VP of Internal Audit, Troy's peer, not his subordinate. Her message was formal but urgent. Ms. Brooks, I'm reaching out regarding some historical documentation questions about financial reporting processes. Would you be available for a brief consultation? I quoted my standard rate. Her acceptance came within minutes. Our video call revealed a woman who looked like she hadn't slept properly in days. Behind her, I could see the familiar glass walls of Vetricor's executive floor, now decorated with whiteboards covered in what looked like forensic accounting. I'll be direct, Jennifer began. We've discovered material discrepancies in our Q2 revenue reporting. The simplified processes implemented earlier this year appear to have created gaps in our controls. Gaps was a polite word for what sounded like chasms. I'm hoping you might have documentation about the original system design, she continued. Specifically, the deferred revenue recognition logic and the currency conversion matrices. I pulled up my meticulously organized archives. I have comprehensive documentation of all systems as they existed at my departure. However, any consulting engagement would need to be structured appropriately. We negotiated terms that made my previous salary look quaint, but the real satisfaction came from her next words. We've also identified issues with the European consolidation. The timing differences you mentioned in your transition notes. We're seeing exactly those problems manifesting. My transition notes. The ones Troy had dismissed as paranoid overthinking. The scope of the failure became clearer as Jennifer outlined their discoveries. Without the validation layers, sales teams had been booking revenue at contract signing rather than service delivery. The simplified currency conversions had mixed rates across time zones, creating phantom gains and losses. The consolidated deferred schedule couldn't differentiate between service types, recognizing installation revenue for services that hadn't even shipped. The external auditors have raised concerns about our Q2 filing, Jennifer said, and I could hear the weight of those words. Revenue restatements were career-ending events, stock price-crushing admissions that meant someone, somewhere, had failed at the most basic promise of financial reporting accuracy. How material are the discrepancies, I asked. Jennifer's pause told me everything. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. Preliminary estimates suggest $12 million in premature revenue recognition. $12 million. The number from my nightmares. The figure I'd calculated as the worst-case scenario if every control failed simultaneously. Troy's simplification had achieved what I'd spent 13 years preventing. We need someone who understands the original architecture, Jennifer continued. Someone who can help us identify where the breakdowns occurred and how to repair them before our amended filing deadline. I thought about Troy's smirk as he deleted my formulas, Logan's cheerful ignorance as he consolidated decades of safeguards into single cells, the colleagues who'd watched my expertise dismissed as unnecessary complexity. I can help, I said, but I'll need complete access to all systems, all personnel, and all documentation. And my team works independently. No interference from the transformation team that created this situation. Agreed, Jennifer said immediately. When can you start? Monday, I replied. Send me the engagement letter and system credentials. I'll need a war room on-site and dedicated resources from every department involved in the close process. After we ended the call, I sat in my home office, surrounded by the success of my consulting practice, and felt the strange satisfaction of prophecy fulfilled. Every error Jennifer described was one I'd prevented dozens of times. Every breakdown followed the exact pattern I'd documented in my When Things Go Wrong folder. My phone buzzed with another message from Raj. "Heard you're coming back. Troy's in crisis meetings all weekend." I didn't respond. There would be time for conversations later, in the war room where we'd reconstruct what Troy had destroyed. For now, I had a presentation to prepare. $12 million of mistakes to map. A simplified system to surgically complicate back to functionality. The Ice Queen was returning to her frozen kingdom, and this time, she'd be the one setting the temperature. Monday morning at 7:45 a.m. I walked through Vitracor's lobby with the confidence of a surgeon arriving for a critical operation. Thomas, the security guard, actually smiled. "Welcome back, Ms. Brooks. They've got you set up on 15. 15, executive floor, not the 14th where I'd spent 13 years, but the rarefied air where decisions were made and, apparently, where those decisions were now being dissected. The war room was a corner conference space with glass walls and a view of the city. Someone had already populated it with printing stations, whiteboards, and enough computing power to run a small country. A hand-lettered sign on the door read, Revenue Remediation Task Force. I preferred my original name, the Autopsy Room. Jennifer Walsh met me at 8 a.m. sharp with coffee and a team of shell-shocked accountants. "Thank you for coming. I've assembled everyone who's been working on the reconciliation. They'll walk you through what we've found so far." What they'd found was a masterclass in how small simplifications compound into catastrophic failures. The lead analyst, a competent woman named Patricia, pulled up the first disaster on the main screen. "This is the European consolidation," she began, her voice steady despite the obvious strain. "When the original multi-tab structure was flattened, we lost the ability to track which numbers had been converted and when. We're showing $8.3 million in revenue that appears to have been converted twice at different rates." I studied the screen, recognizing the ghost of my original architecture beneath layers of improvements. "Show me the source data," I said. "Not the simplified version, the raw feeds." What followed was archaeological excavation through digital ruins. Each layer we peeled back revealed another place where Troy's trust-based philosophy had collided with reality. The automated checks I'd built, dismissed as paranoia, would have caught every single error we were now hunting manually. By 10 a.m., we'd identified the first major breaking point. Logan had hard-coded Q1 accrual reversals instead of letting them flow through the system. When Q2 began, those reversals never hit, creating a massive overstatement that rippled through every subsequent calculation. "He probably didn't understand the reversal logic," Patricia said, pulling up Logan's modification history. "Look here. He commented out the automated reversal because it was creating negative numbers that didn't make sense. Of course they didn't make sense to him. Reversals were supposed to create negative numbers. That was their entire purpose, to back out estimates and replace them with actuals. But Logan, equipped with an MBA and Troy's confidence, had decided the system was wrong rather than his understanding." Troy himself appeared at 11:30 a.m., his usual polish cracked around the edges. The Patek Philippe was gone, replaced by a fitness tracker that showed a heart rate well above resting. "Madeline, good to see you again." "Troy," I acknowledged, not looking up from the screen where I was rebuilding the deferred revenue logic. "I'll need you to walk me through your simplification decisions. Specifically, why you chose to eliminate the revenue waterfall timing controls." His jaw tightened. "Those controls were redundant. We have systematic checks at the point of entry." I corrected. "You had systematic checks, until you removed them." I pulled up the modification log. July 7th. Your team deleted the installation verification requirements. July 12th. The service activation confirmations were marked as optional. July 18th. The entire waterfall was consolidated into what Logan called a streamlined recognition tool. Each date corresponded to a control that would have prevented exactly the kind of misstatement we were now unraveling. Troy's transformation team had been so focused on making things simple, they'd forgotten why they were complex in the first place. The CFO arrived after lunch, Marcus Chen, who'd been in Asia during my departure and Troy's rise. He listened to my preliminary findings with the expression of someone calculating exactly how much this would cost in market cap. How bad, he asked, when I finished the initial assessment. 12 million is the floor, not the ceiling, I replied. That's just the recognition timing. We haven't started on the currency issues or the subsidiary misalignments. Based on what I'm seeing, you'll need to restate Q2 at minimum, possibly Q1 as well, depending on how far back the logic errors go. Marcus turned to Troy. I thought you said the simplification would make us more accurate, not less. The systems were working as designed, Troy began, but Jennifer cut him off. The systems were working as Troy designed them, she said, which is to say, they weren't working at all. I spent the afternoon in forensic mode, tracking each error back to its source. The pattern was always the same: complex validation removed, simple solution implemented, reality ignored until it couldn't be. My original controls hadn't been paranoid overthinking. They'd been scar tissue, each one preventing a specific wound from reopening. By 4 p.m., we'd traced the full 12 million. Of that, 9 million came from revenue recognized before installation was complete, exactly what my 27 worksheet monster had been designed to prevent. The remaining 3 million was a mix of currency mistiming and subsidiary consolidation errors, all flowing from the elimination of checks Troy had deemed redundant. We need to rebuild the entire recognition system, I told the assembled team. Not patch it, rebuild it. Every control that was removed needs to be reinstated. Every validation that was simplified needs to be restored to its original complexity. How long? Marcus asked. 6 weeks minimum. That's working around the clock with a full team. You'll need to file for an extension on your Q3 reporting. The room fell silent. Extensions were admissions of failure, red flags to regulators and investors alike, but the alternative, filing incorrect numbers again, was worse. Do it, Marcus said. Whatever you need. How much? I quoted a number that made even the CFO blink. That's for the complete remediation. My team, my methods, no interference. We rebuild it right, or we don't rebuild it at all. Troy started to object, but Marcus cut him off with a gesture. Madeline has carte blanche. Everyone in this room reports to her for the duration of this project. The meeting ended with the kind of shell-shocked quiet that follows natural disasters. As people filed out, Troy lingered, his transformation team conspicuously absent. This isn't personal, I told him, finally looking up from my screens. This is math. Math doesn't care about your MBA or your theories or your simplification philosophy. It only cares about being right. He left without responding, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was already working on his exit strategy, his LinkedIn story about pursuing new opportunities, and grateful for the learning experience. Jennifer stayed behind, watching me work with something like awe. You predicted this, didn't you? Every bit of it. I pulled up my When Things Go Wrong folder, showing her the documents I'd created on my last day. When European revenue doesn't tie out. When deferred calculations break, each title matched a crisis we were now facing. My God, she whispered. You knew. I didn't know, I corrected. I remembered. Every error we're fixing today is one that happened before. Troy thought he was innovating. He was just forgetting faster than the rest of us learned. The boardroom hadn't been designed for forensic accounting presentations, but by week 3, we transformed it into a courtroom where numbers testified against hubris. The mahogany table disappeared under printed reports, each one annotated with the precise moment Troy's simplifications had failed. I'd insisted on hard copies. Digital files could be minimized, but paper demanded attention. Thursday at 2 p.m., the full board assembled. I'd spent the previous night preparing what I privately called the reckoning, a slide-by-slide deconstruction of how $12 million had vanished into the gap between theory and reality. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, clicking to my first slide. A single Excel cell appeared on the screen, highlighted in red. This is line 287 of the original revenue recognition model. It contained a formula that prevented European revenue from being recognized before installation confirmation was received. Click, the same cell, now empty. This is line 287 after the simplification initiative. The formula was deleted on July 12th at 3:47 p.m. by Logan Williams, acting on Troy Whitaker's direct instructions. I heard Troy shift in his seat but didn't acknowledge him. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about the truth, displayed in merciless detail. The deletion of this single formula created a cascade failure, I continued, advancing to a flowchart that looked like a disease spreading through a body. Without the installation check, revenue flowed directly from contract signature to recognized income. This affected 43% of European transactions in Q2. Board members who usually doze through financial presentations were taking notes. The lead director, a woman who'd run 3 Fortune 500 companies, leaned forward. How was this not caught by internal audit? Jennifer Walsh stood to answer, but I raised a hand. This was my presentation. Internal audit protocols were also simplified, I said, pulling up Troy's email from June. Trust the process, not the paranoia, was the exact phrase used. Audit checkpoints were reduced from 17 to 4. The remaining 4 were deemed sufficient, based on the assumption that upstream controls were functioning. But they weren't, the director said. No, they'd been deleted. I moved through the evidence methodically. Each slide showed a before and after, the original control, its purpose documented in my careful notes, and then the simplified version that had replaced it. The cumulative effect was devastating.